Thank you, Andreas, for the introduction, and thank you, Arnoud, for inviting me back here. It's a real pleasure to be back at APE and to have the opportunity to talk again about open access for monographs. Let me correct Andreas right away that this study was commissioned by Knowledge Exchange, not Knowledge Unlatched, but same difference. So, before I start, let me just say that yesterday we heard about the humanities from Caroline Edwards. She was talking about academic-led publishing, and I'll be talking about this space to a certain extent as well. It will be about books, but monographs are an important part of scholarly output in the humanities, as I'm sure you all know. One point I'll try to make is this: monographs need to transition to OA just as articles. And to make that happen, we need more attention from stakeholders. A second point is that articles and monographs are very different. For most authors in the humanities, the monograph represents far more than a presentation of results, research results. It's actually the writing of the monograph. You could compare that with the research process. So it's part of the research process, writing a monograph. And the result is more than just a presentation of results. In terms of open science, you could say it's data. And for the humanities, books are data for their research. And so, in the humanities, you can't really imagine a transition to open science without books becoming open. I want to stress this point. So, this is the background for the study that I was involved in. And with me, Francis Pinter of Knowledge Unlatched, or founder of Knowledge Unlatched, I should say, and Neil Stern. And the three of us got the commission from Knowledge Exchange. They supported the study together with the Austrian Science Fund, FWF, Kristin in Norway, and Couperin, the Library Consortium in France. This is the cover you see here, and the DOI, and it's free to download. And it's 180 pages long, so it's quite a read, but I encourage you to do so. Just to tell you a little bit about the structure of the report, because actually I won't be able to tell you very much in a quarter of an hour, 20 minutes, and to give you an idea of what it's about. Actually, the meat of the report is the country studies, which is part 2. It has 8 country studies, where we look into policies, funding, and publishing in 8 different countries. In part 1, we have a sort of a synthesis of all these different country studies in an overview, which we call the landscape overview. And of course, there are recommendations, there is a summary, and some more other stuff. In part 3, we have different ways into this report. We have a section on notable initiatives and projects, just to sort of highlight some of the interesting things that we found in each of these countries, and a set of recommendations. And then in part 4, there is literature review, an extensive literature review, and there are some contributions. One about book processing charges, which was written by Francis, and I'm sure she will talk about that a little bit after me. And another was about the impact of open access books, and that's a subject that Ross will pick up also in this session. So 8 countries, 3 in the Scandinavia, 3 large countries, Germany, France, and the United Kingdom, and Austria and the Netherlands. They are all, obviously, in Europe, in North of Europe, they're all very wealthy. And if you look at the ways the books are published, they are all very different. So that's one of the findings I'll talk about now. There is a huge variation in the way books are being published if you cross borders from one country to the next. It has to do with many different aspects of the publishing process. It has to do with the market, with the size of the population, with the size of the language area. It also has to do with scholarly culture, because that varies a lot from one country to the next, and it also has to vary. It also has to do with the way let's say, the economy works. So is it very market-driven, or is there a lot of public support? And relating to that is something you could call the strength of the book market. And some countries have a strong book market for monographs, others a very weak one. And that, of course, is an important aspect as well if you sort of look at the possibilities to make books open access and introduce a new business model. So that means in some countries it's quite common to support monograph publishing. In others, it doesn't happen, or it happens much less. And so those are some of the differences we found if you look across countries. But within countries, there are also large differences. There are differences, obviously, there are very large and very small book publishers living together. There are commercial publishers and university presses living together. And there are lots of new presses as well. There are academic-led presses, as Caroline Edwards introduced yesterday, Open Library of Humanities. And new university presses that are basically library-based, that are born and run within the library. So all these different, and you could say that open access is leading to innovation in book publishing. So that's another key finding. Open access is actually a transitional process, a transformative process where publishers are starting to publish in different ways. There are new entrants. There are, as I said, there are libraries starting to publish with open access as a core motive for this process, to start their own press. There are new roles. Libraries are doing it. There are academics are starting to publish. So, for instance, Open Book Publishers or Open Humanities Press, or here in Berlin, Language Science Press. All these publishers started really as an academic, interested in publishing and feeling in an open access model, they should be doing it themselves. So those are some of the new processes. And then you'll see new collaborations in many different ways. There are universities working together to establish a press, or they are establishing a quality label, as in Sweden. Criterium is an example. In the UK, there is White Rose Press, which is a collaboration of a number of presses. There are new business models. So, the best known is obviously the crowdsourcing model of Knowledge Unlatched. Knowledge Unlatched is now by far the biggest single source of funding of open access monographs. But there are other collaborative models. So, for instance, Luminos in California, Lever Press in the US as well, where a number of institutions come together to fund a publishing program of a press. So there's all these new models. And there are, new services, new infrastructures. I'd like to mention Ubiquity Press as a publishing platform. And also Janeway, which was introduced not too long ago by Birkbeck University under the direction of Martin Eve, which is an open source publishing software system. So there is all that. Another finding is that it's early days. The transition to open access, in my mind, has only just begun. Open access monographs are growing at a very high pace, 50% growth, annual growth for the directory of open access books since the start, and they have passed the milestone of 10,000 books. Just recently, at the end of 2017. But there's something else to be said, and that is that if you see the graph here, actually there are 250 publishers registered or listed in the Directory of Open Access Books, and together they publish these 10,000 books. So there's very few publishers responsible for open access publishing. There are thousands of academic book publishers in the world, and just a small portion of them have started doing this. And there's something else you can say, and that is that the larger publishers find it harder to really make this transition. The top 4 monograph publishers in the UK last year published over 6,500 books together. You're talking about Routledge, Palgrave, Oxford and Cambridge University Press. 6,500, close to 7,000 actually. And they have less than 200 open access books in the directory of open access books. So I think that's a telling thing. And Yeah, you can also see that if you sort of draw a line and you only count the publishers that have published more than 20 books in open access, there are just 100 of those worldwide that are listed in DOAB. There might be more, but we know about these 100. They are responsible for 70% of all books, so 7,000 books almost. Looking at the books in these 8 countries, this is also an important point we want to make, where you see that in some countries it's actually really starting to take off, in others much less so. So there are some big countries, they have larger markets, they have more publishers, so you'd expect more books in those countries, and that you can see that that's actually true. France and Germany are leading, but they are way ahead of the United Kingdom, which only has 835, as we last counted, in DOAB. So France and Germany are doing relatively well, and the United Kingdom is doing a little less well. You can see that the Netherlands isn't doing too badly. They started early with a number of publishers already, I think, in 2010. And yeah, so early adopters. There's also some policies and some funding for books in the Netherlands, and that helped. And the same is true for Austria, which is a rather smaller country, but they have relatively quite a lot of books. And of course, in the Scandinavia, you see that the situation is less ideal, with Norway and Denmark at the bottom, Finland some more. We did a little benchmarking exercise, and I'm going to take you through this quickly. It's arbitrary, it's debatable, it's subjective, but just to give you a quick idea of where these countries are in terms of the transition to open access, in 3 perspectives: policies, funding, and publishing. So first of all, looking at policies for books, you see that Austria clearly leads. They have a very strong open access mandate, stronger than any other country. There are very few mandates, by the way, but FWF has a mandate. And yeah, the only other countries that have a sort of a mandate are the Netherlands. And there are some policies at institutional level in France, in Germany. But so in terms of policies, there are a few mandates, but there aren't many policies supporting open access books in other countries. In terms of funding, again, you will see that Austria is leading the way. FWF actually has a funding program that supports all researchers, not just the ones that receive a grant from FWF. So all Austrian-based researchers can apply for a book processing charge to make their book open access. So that's really an ideal policy. Norway and the Netherlands have some funding. France has some funding. Germany and France more indirect, not direct funding. And the United Kingdom is a little bit behind, as are some of the other Scandinavian countries. Looking at publishing, the situation is a little bit different. You can argue that Germany is doing quite well, France is doing quite well, the Netherlands are doing quite well, but the United Kingdom actually, although they didn't publish a lot of open access books so far, are doing quite well because there is a lot of innovation going on. So they are also seriously considering policies and ways forward for open access books. Let me give you an overview in a couple of slides of these 8 countries. So first of all, this matrix shows you a transition to open access, vertically and horizontally, the strength of the book publishing industry. I think clearly the UK is one of the strongest book publishing countries in terms of monograph publishing. And yeah, I think Netherlands, with an international perspective, and mostly English books, are pretty strong as well. And French and German markets are pretty strong. So in that sense, they all are quite strong. And particularly if compare that to the Scandinavian countries, to Finland, Norway, and Denmark. Yeah, they don't have a strong market. They have a small language area, and they struggle, and they need support. You can see that in terms of the transition, really, Austria is doing really well. They've almost, gotten to their goal of basically making all funded research open access, including monographs, and the others have still some way to go. To be fair, everybody is moving upwards, and also you can say that Austria is also moving to strengthen its book sector, because they have a publishing program or a supporting program where they try and professionalize the publishing industry. Another matrix, this is then an axis of gold and green, and the availability of funding for open access books. Here you see that there is one country clearly green, it's Denmark, and there are a couple of countries clearly gold, the Netherlands and Austria. And there are, well, the rest is more or less neutral. Some are clearly neutral, some have a slight preference for gold. In some cases, it depends on the funder. So there is a mixed model, and that's the case in the UK, for instance. There is clearly no funding at present in Denmark, and hardly any funding in the UK. There is some more funding in Norway and Finland, and some more indirect funding for Germany and France. And in France, there is Open Edition, which is a central platform which hosts almost all university presses, and they all are also publishing in open access. So you can say that the whole sector of non-profit publishing has made a transition. And the same holds true for Germany, where the university presses were founded around the turn of the century. They all have open access in their, as a goal. They all publish in open access. And together they have published quite a lot of open access books. So there's in non-profit publishing, you can say that Germany and France are doing very well. And they are supported by their institutions in Germany, by the universities. So, yeah, there is gold funding available in Austria and also officially in the Netherlands, although the Netherlands is focusing very much on presently on offsetting deals, and currently these deals don't include books. Looking at book publishers globally, there's something else to see. Europe is clearly leading the way. I think probably this is a bit biased because we don't list publishers in other continents as well as in Europe, so you'd expect the real figure to be slightly lower, but I have no doubt that Europe is actually leading the way, which is good. North America, South America are clearly also making this move. Other areas, Africa and Asia in particular, aren't making the move, and so that's also something to take note of. Then there is licenses. So typically, unlike articles, there is a whole range of open licenses being used to make books open access. When we started, there were hardly any books being published under a CC BY license. Currently, that figure has gone up to 20%. It means, because this is a cumulative chart, that there are presently a lot of books going in that are actually CC BY. It's quite a normal thing. And the CC BY NC is slowly decreasing. CC BY NC ND, the most restrictive license, is still the largest, but is also decreasing. This is a bit of a troublesome table. You won't be able to read it all, but what I want to say about this is that if you look at open access policies and mandates across every dimension, and we don't have a lot of mandates for books, but if you look at them, they are all, there is an enormous diversity along all these dimensions among these policies. So if you go to each of the funders, they all have their own policy, and they all have their own judgment on how to, let's say, devise their policy. So across all these dimensions, and this is something publishers need to deal with, the policies vary. Some conclusions. Different markets lead to different approaches to open access. No single model will fit all. We need a whole variety of models. This, of course, has to do with all the differences within these countries and the book publishing cultures and the way books are or are not supported by public or private funding. There is quite a lot of funding available, especially in the continent. There are quite a few countries in the continent that do support open access books, and this can be through private funds, as in Germany, also public funds, and it can be, in other countries, in Scandinavia it also happens. It's quite common in the German language area, at least. You can hope that these funds will become available for open access, and that would make it quite easy to make the transition. So that's one way. But there is also, of course, a lot of funding available, potentially within libraries, because they buy books and they could make books open access through the model, for instance, of Knowledge Unlatched. So libraries have a major role in the future of this transition to open access. There's still a lot to do. So that's my last slide. There's a lot to do around discoverability. We need more funding sources. We need more involvement from libraries, as I said. We need more open access mandates from funders. There are only 4 or 5 funders that actually mandate open access for monographs. Among them also the Wellcome Trust, the European Research Council, and since a few months the Swiss National Research Fund as well. We need authors to become aware of the benefits of open access, and this is something Ross will talk about a bit more, and so will Francis, I believe. We need to do some cost modeling. Publishers make their own book processing charges, and they have their own method to do this, and it's really unclear why a book would cost X rather than Z, and so we also need more transparency. That's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eelco. It's very impressive. Are there questions to Eelco? I have one question. Do you have any numbers about disciplines in which open access books are published or not?
No. I should look into that, actually. Yeah, that's an interesting question. I haven't tried to do it. No.
Okay. Perhaps it would be an interesting investigation, because I heard from my researchers that they don't like e-books at all, not so much, because they have to write it not in their own language. And for humanists, the own language, German or French, is very important. So, and they want to be urged to write it in English, because if they write it in English, they have a big market. Yeah. But it's not they are not very familiar to publish their work in English.
I know.
This is a language argument.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, further questions?
I have a question. I'm Rick Anderson from the University of Utah. So I have a comment and a question. The comment that occurred to me as we were looking at the statistics for the different European countries was it would be interesting to see those numbers on a per capita basis. So, you know, we see a relatively large number in France and a relatively small number in Denmark. It'd be interesting to see how many OA books per capita are being produced in those two countries, because obviously France has a much larger population, a larger number of institutions, presumably more money. So that's just one thought. My question was, there was a lot of discussion in your or not a lot of discussion, there was a lot of reference in your presentation to mandates and the desirability of mandates. Would it ever be appropriate for the choice to be left to authors, or are we looking forward to a future in which the decision is no longer the authors to make?
In a situation where you are receiving money to do research, there are requirements that the funder can make, and if the funder really wants the results of that work to become open access, then I think the funder has a right to mandate. And yeah, I think that's a reasonable proposition. You take the money, you do the research, then you have to meet some demands, and one of them is open access.
I'm sorry, guess I should clarify my question. My question isn't, do funders have the right to make these requirements? The question is, do we think that is that a desirable situation in which if you get funding to do your research, it's no longer your choice how it will be published?
Yeah, that's something for everybody to decide for themselves. My opinion is that to make it work, scholarly communication in the 21st century, with the importance of open science, with the development of scholarly communication in general, open access is absolutely essential, and you can't leave it to individual choice to make that change.
All right, Anthony.
Anthony Watkinson, Cyber Research. I'm just thinking about the numbers here, and I understand from the 2 surveys done by Indiana University Press and University of Michigan Press is that they've shown that the humanities authors in their universities actually prefer to publish with the 4 big players: OUP, CUP, Palgrave, or rather Routledge and Palgrave. And this must make, some of these publishers are actually importing authors from the US on quite a large scale, I guess. That is another dimension, isn't it? They're not just, the publishers are not just publishing the results of the humanities research in their own countries.
Absolutely, and particularly UK publishers and US publishers, of course, operate in this much larger space. And they are acquiring authors from different areas. So they have very fundamental different regimes or policies that they have to deal with. It's a much tougher job, I guess, yeah.
There's been another question. Yes.
Thank you. I have a question about the standardization. We've heard a lot the last couple of days about standardization and to bring also in the user experience side. And now we are more or less in the early days of open monographs. Can we do something concerning this? And I mean, to prevent that we come up with all kinds of solutions and DRM restrictions, etc., and make a kind of standard open access monograph platform. What can we do? I mean, from a perspective of publishers, libraries, institutions.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think so on the one hand, there are some aggregators that work according to standards. They make these books available in a uniform way. And they promote certain metadata that are required. They make sure that you have the right metadata to make these books discoverable. They share these standards. We've done lots of work on standards of metadata. We try and provide transparency around peer review practices, for instance. But on the other hand, I think, this is, as I said, it's early days. We need publishers to simply try what works for them. We need everybody to sort of take this up and learn how this might work in the end. And to start with standardization sort of goes contrary to that. So I think that'll come out of more experience and more books becoming open access eventually. Yeah?
Thank you. A last question? Thank you very much, Eelco.
Thank you.
Our